It was, and you complained about it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lunchtime. It's Dice Time. Sorry we're a bit late. I had a couple of technical issues just before we started that were mostly Josh's fault.
So unreasonable.
But we are going to introduce ourselves as usual. I am Becky Annison, one half of Black Armada Games, and then I'm going to toss it over to Australia next.
Well, Australia and London. Hi, I'm Nick Bates. I'm not Black Armada. I'm Ickbat Games, but we're all friends here.
Hello, I'm Josh. I'm the other half of Black Armada Games.
So today, this lunchtime, I hope everyone can hear me all right, we are talking about, well, the title of episode 6 is You Are Rolling That Wrong. But what we're really talking about is the kind of conglomeration of changing dice rolls. And I don't mean rolling the dice and not liking the number and fudging it. I'm talking about adding modifiers to dice rolls, when you add the modifiers to dice rolls in different systems. We're talking assistance mechanics. We're talking mechanics which change the fiction after the dice roll has happened. We're talking all of these things and more. And I don't actually have a good name for them. Has anybody got like a good name for this kind of constellation of mechanics, or do people just not talk about it like we do?
This tiny small topic that we're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a term of art for it, like the whole category, or even for like the individual things, like modifying a roll by spending a currency. That doesn't seem to have a category that it lives in.
No.
We need to create a grand encyclopedia of design terms.
Yeah,
so
people
can slag
it
off.
It would have made it much easier to write the kind of the blurb for this session if we had that. So if anybody comes up with a good name for this kind of constellation of mechanics that change the dice roll, please suggest it to us. But so, given that we don't have a good definition, shall we just talk through some of the things that we think are in this unnamed category that we're going to talk about?
So maybe it's just worth me thinking, like, I think this topic's broadly been triggered by a conversation that Nick and I keep having about the difference between Forged in the Dark modification and some of the games that I've written. Specifically, so in Forged in the Dark, one of the main options to modify your roll is to push yourself. You get to do that once per roll at most, and it costs you 2 stress on a stress track. And what that gets you is an extra die, which is a big deal in Forged in the Dark. 1 extra die could completely jump your roll from complete failure to complete success, and or it could do nothing at all. And that's why we talk about it, because it's like a gambler's thing to do. You're spending a currency for no guarantee of any benefit whatsoever, and you're doing it before you roll the dice, so you don't even know whether you needed to do it, really. And that's a very obviously the original Voice in the Dark game is Blades in the Dark. It's a very sort of daring thief type of thing to do, to chuck some resources and hope something sticks. But like, you can contrast that with Last Fleet and Ex Tenebris, both of which you do after you roll the dice. You spend a currency very similar to stress, and what you get is a fixed bonus to your dice roll. So you know what your result was, you know you didn't like it, and you know how much you'd have to spend in order to fix it, and you spend exactly that amount, right? So that's like, again, the feel of that is very different, and it fits more with the kind of, you are professionals trying to do a professional job.
And a little tiny bit of inside baseball on that discussion. I think at least part of the reason why you opted for those mechanics in Last Fleet and Ex Tenebris is personal preference, Josh.
Yeah.
And it was interesting for us to discuss, to start from a position of, I like this thing and I don't like the other thing so much, but then end up having a discussion about what the consequences of those decisions are on how a dice roll or a dice rolling mechanic feels.
Yeah,
because
no,
I think they
that's
feel
completely
very
right, yeah.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, but so there's a kind of how does it feel in relation to the fiction of the game
Mm.
thing, which is what I was describing. But there is a personal preference thing. I just, it annoys me to waste a currency spend on something that I don't know whether I need it and might or might not help me. I like to know what I'm getting.
And I don't
Additional?
think Blades in the Dark is the only system that does the pre-dice roll modification. I'm sure there are others where you can build up dice pools. You know, I'm struggling to think of one off the top of my head, but I feel like I don't think Blades was the first that did that. But I do think it's much more thematically appropriate in Blades than it is in others.
Yeah, I think any game where you're building a dice pool invites you to add dice or change dice sizes ahead of making the roll.
Like, I'm sure that it has it in Don't Rest Your Head, which again, I think it does it in a very thematically appropriate way. But there's definitely a bit about in Don't Rest Your Head about stacking the dice pool with dice, which if they come up, then in some ways it's good, but if they come up, it's also in some ways bad.
Yeah, and I think like
Madness mechanic.
historically, doing it before you roll the dice
Right.
has been the norm.
Mm.
I think probably the first game I came up against where it very clearly chose to say after the roll was Apocalypse World, and I think that was purely in relation to its support move that you can do it after the fact. You don't have to do it in advance of making the roll. So I think this is kind of a new and relatively unusual development.
I was just going to share actually. John has just posted in the comments that, and you're right, John. This is absolutely one of the ones I was thinking of that I couldn't remember quite. But Gumshoe, definitely. Again, you are you are spending skill points to turn them into dice at various different points.
Yeah, although again, it's you commit that spend.
Yeah.
Before you know what the result
Yeah.
was, so you might
It's
have
a
wasted.
gamble again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fate is in an interesting place on this one actually, because it is agnostic as to when you choose to apply your modifiers.
Why would you ever choose to apply it before you roll then?
Well, that's interesting, right? I don't think you would. So it's interesting that the rules are specifically state that it's up to you to make a decision about when you want to do that. In practice, that doesn't happen, I don't think.
No.
So it's a modify after the fact situation.
Yeah. So we've got modifiers before the fact, which are a bit of a gamble. They're just increasing the odds that it's going to turn out okay. And I think we've all been in a situation where we've spent a load of points on increasing those odds only to have the dice laugh in our face. We have got after the fact, where you know what a roll is and you can make a reasonable kind of housekeeping adjustment to decide what you're going to spend to improve it. You know, and sometimes, you know, as in, I'm thinking the extenebris now, you're spending a currency, you're spending shadow. We've also got assists, haven't we? Do we want to talk about assistance on rolls? Do you, Nick, want to stand up and shout loudly
pet
about
peeve
how
of mine.
about your pet peeve?
Yeah, my controversial opinion is that virtually all assistance mechanics in role-playing games suck.
Oh, discourse.
Because I think they introduce grit into the flow of a discussion about dice rolling that is unhelpful. So you often find yourself in a situation kind of either whether you're doing modification before a dice roll or after a dice roll where you start asking, can anyone assist? I find it particularly unpleasant when it's a discussion that you're having after the dice roll. So you've gone through the trouble of working out what you're going to roll, what's happening. You make the dice roll, you've calculated the numbers, you have a sense for what the results are, and then you start saying, can anyone help me out? And there's a round of, well, I can help. Okay, how are you going to help? And the end result of that conversation is that maybe somebody decides they are going to help and you get a +1 bonus and you've just spent a chunk of time, you know, arriving at something that ideally would be much, much smoother than that. This is my major gripe with assistance mechanics. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there before I start talking about my solution to assistance grit. Josh, I think
Well,
maybe you have some opinions here.
yeah, I think he
but
does.
I'm kind of more interested to hear your solution before I jump in, to be honest.
I don't have, so let me be clear. I don't have a mechanical solution that I'm entirely satisfied with. I think some games do this better than others. So there's more and less grit in some systems than others. But my solution is for players to take responsibility for assisting. So when you're sitting down at the table to play and things are happening, actions happening, somebody's making a dice roll, what I try to be doing is be thinking the whole time, if it comes to it, or if it looks like it's going to be helpful, how can I help? What can my character do to assist here? So that even though I'm not doing anything to a design to remove that friction, to remove the grit, at least when we hit that point, I'm ready to go. If somebody says, "Can anyone assist?" I can say, "Yep," and this is what I'm going to do, and have it happen quickly.
And is it that it interrupts just the flow of the conversation with now we're going to stop and we're going to have a kind of a out of character meta discussion about who's going to assist and how they're going to do it? Or is it that at the point at which the role has happened, the fiction has already been sort of decided? You were doing this thing, you rolled on it, you did it, and now we're going to retroactively change the fiction a little bit to say, oh, well, actually, I was there holding your hands to help you do that a little bit better. Or is it both?
Well, that second point is a really interesting one, I think, because it's a sort of broader discussion about about modifying after the fact.
Yes, I've just
and what
seen
that
that
looks like in practice.
John has posted about Carl from Brindlewood with the masks mechanic, and we
Right.
are going to get to that, John. But we're going to talk about it because it goes in a separate additional bucket.
There's a third thing I'd add to that list of things that frustrate me about assist that you just provided, Becky. The third is that once you've hit the point where you've requested an assist, the fictional justification for an assist often ends up being pretty paper thin, right? You're fishing around for something. You just want to give them the +1 that will get them over the line.
Yes.
And so, you say, I cheer from the sideline. I'm going to roll my inspire roll.
Yeah. So this is the thing that I find that's the thing that most annoys me about assists, is when they are paper thin in that way. I don't think it's just limited to assists though. Like, I've been in Fate games where people are kind of trying to ping off aspects that are very obviously like a really thin justification, or they've deliberately designed their aspects to try and have the most ridiculously broad applicability. So I kind of feel like the whole kind of fiction first philosophy of you need to explain what concrete thing you're doing in the fiction that has a concrete benefit is what helps with that for me. And that's what I want people to do when they assist, is give me something that feels concrete rather than a sort of wishy-washy, well, I'm just sort of there with my flannel to sort of polish whatever you've done. Because that's how it feels, they're not really doing anything. As you say, they're just cheering from the sidelines, as you're sort of saying, you go, champ, which feels like bullshit.
Oh, and this just increases the friction, right? Because you've hit the point where you've asked for an assist. Everything's ground to a stop. Somebody said, well, look, I'm willing to help. I'm not really sure how. Maybe I can just cheer. And then somebody else says, well, I mean, is that really helping? And then
so
there's this
now
whole
you're taking
discussion.
longer. So maybe the answer to that is, because I don't think, Nick, that you object to the complex discussion of positioning that happens in a Forged in the Dark game. Maybe that's because it happens before the roll.
Yeah, part of it. Also, as I think we've probably discussed at length, I feel like that friction eases off the longer you play a game, a Forged in the Dark game.
Yeah, but I feel like if it was maybe if it was a regular part before you hit the dice, then it's kind of like it's forming part of your fictional positioning negotiation. It's like, can I do this? Have I got help? All that kind of stuff.
Precisely how assists work in a Forged in the Dark game.
I'm just going to share a a comment from Seeds, and then I'm going to share a comment from John, actually. So assists are best when everyone is engaged in what's happening and taking part. I think, yes, I think that's what we're
Hard
saying.
agree.
That's gonna be one of the things that's gonna make Nick feel happy. But I also need to kind of highlight John's comment here. This is needs to be concrete and material pre-roll. I like this also because I feel like part of the point for me about the dice roll when it happens is that it turns a sort of Schrodinger's cat situation into, you know, we're going to open the box and we're going to find out if Schrodinger's cat is alive or dead. And it's kind of collapsed the uncertainty around what's happened in the scene. But if we then say, oh, well, actually, we can open up that uncertainty, because even though nobody mentioned they were standing behind the bad guy with a dagger to their back, I did an assist where I was, in fact, standing behind the bad guy with a dagger in my hand at their back. And it feels like that's quite an important thing that maybe we would have noticed that should have been in our contemplation at the point at which we were building the fictional positioning for the dice roll.
And assists often feel like a tacked on mechanic, and I think that's kind of part of what you're alluding to there is like, you know, can you do that? Can you just say, well, my assist is that I'm standing behind the bad guy with a dagger to their back? That's quite a big.
That's an extreme example.
So, and games often are sort of like, oh, you know, here's half a page on the support mechanic, and you know, I've given you 6 pages on how to resolve a thing, and then I've just sort of given you a paragraph on supports. But sorry, just to go on about the concrete point, like completely agree, concrete good. Big fan of that. I also like concrete effects, and I think it's a shame that support moves are very often limited to have a bonus. Have an extra die, rather than, well, what can I do extra or better now that I've got your support? What additional option do I have? And I'm not saying nobody ever does that, because clearly people do, but it tends to be a bit of a kind of, oh, can I get a +1 bonus? Yes, you can. Fine. Okay, well done.
So are you saying, Josh, that you wish you designed Ex Tenebris so that edge was the only effect of an assist?
I did consider doing that, but I do like simplicity as well.
But like a defend action is a good example of this, right? If anyone's looking for a bit of clarity about what Josh means by do something extra, like if you assist, quote unquote, by guarding somebody, stepping in to protect them while they're performing an action or something like that, so that consequences from that action fall upon you. I think that's an example of what you're talking about here, Josh. Like you've materially changed the fiction by assisting. You haven't simply added a dice roll.
Yes.
Or a +1 bonus or whatever.
Yeah, or sometimes I feel like I think Blades has got like setup, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Where it's like, well, you can't do this unless somebody does a thing to make it possible for you, which I think like too often we're just looking for, can I get a big bonus? And it's like sometimes it's kind of, actually you can't even attempt this roll unless you've got my help, and here's how I'm making it possible for you.
Yep. I like that. Is now, since we're talking about fictional positioning, changing the fictional positioning, now a good point to talk about the other classification of mechanics in this area that we don't yet have a name for, which is where, so we've got dice rolls, we've got changes to modifiers to the dice roll that happen before you roll the dice. We've got modifiers to the dice roll that have happened after you've rolled the dice, and assists can sit in either of those camps, and they're a whole separate issue on their own. But I think there's a third category, and I know you two think there's millions more categories in this, but the one I'm interested in talking about is the one that John alluded to earlier, which in Carved from Brindlewood Games, where the dice roll has happened, the fiction is now set, this thing definitely happened, you definitely died, and now I'm going to spend a mask that says, yeah, but that happened in a mask in the between, for example, it says, yeah, but that happened in a multiverse, a multiversal bit of the world that is not my bit of the multiverse. So it happened to a version of my character, but not this one, and we are completely nixing the dice roll and the fiction that came out of it. And I think that is slightly different from Blades as well, because Blades has something in this space. But am I right in thinking, and you're the expert here, Nick and Josh, Blades has a mechanic whereby you can say, yes, the guard did hear us. We failed our stealth roll. The guard heard us, but we're now recontextualizing it with a flashback to say, but we'd already bribed the guard way back when, which also, it doesn't actually change the fiction in the way that the Carved from Brindlewood changes the established fiction, but it says the context of the fiction is not what you thought it was. I put those two in another bucket.
Yeah, there's also a Blades in the Dark Resistance there.
Yeah,
which is
I think you're
same.
confusing.
Am I
flashbacks
thinking?
with resistance,
Sorry,
probably.
Mike. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flashbacks you can also, I mean, they're in the same kind of ballpark. Yeah. So this is the dice have hit the table. You know what the number is.
Yeah.
So you know what the notional outcome is, but then you apply something that changes the fiction, usually in your favor. A resistance mask from Carved from Brindlewood Bay's games, Carved from Brindlewood games. Yeah. And I think this one's really interesting because I think that there's something that is inherently, sort of, for me at least, slightly unsatisfying about just changing the fiction. But there are ways that games make that more or less palatable for me. And I kind of have an acceptably palatable version and a kind of impressively palatable
Hot take.
version.
Okay.
The acceptably palatable version for me is a Blades in the Dark Resistance, at least how I think they're supposed to be used, which is that the fiction as described up until this point remains true, but you add another wrinkle on top of that twists the outcome in your favor. So, you're dangling off the edge of a building and the bad guy stamps on your feet and you fall. That happened. That's what the dice roll told you happened. The consequence for that is you're going to hit the ground and get hurt. You resist. And in resisting, you say, I grab a gutter on the way down, or this is a place where you could use a flashback to have something, you placed a cart underneath this building expecting this moment to come, so you land in the hay. So yeah, exactly as Caesar said in the chat, the resist is explaining how you roll with the punch, so the bad thing still happens, but you roll forward with it. That works for me, although sometimes it's hard to remember in the moment to do that. Or you get a little bit stuck trying to figure out exactly the mechanics of that in the fiction. I think I'm on record as saying I don't love masks in Carved from Brindlewood games, but what I do appreciate about the use of the mask is that the game, at least in the between, is what it's telling you when you use a mask is you did see the bad thing come to pass. That did happen on the on screen, but then we move into an alternate reality where it didn't.
Yeah.
So it that's what happened. And there's a Forge in the Dark game called the External Containment Bureau. It's a little zine game about kind of psychic spies, and they do something similar with their resists. They kind of bring a resist into the fiction. You're playing, I think, psychic spies. I think that's right. It's been a while since I read it. But the act of resisting is them distorting reality around them to make the thing not pass. So it's brought the fact that you're changing the fiction into the fiction rather than asked you to do the roll with it thing.
I think the line between these two is blurrier than what you're saying seems to imply. Like, I feel like it would be legit in Blades to say, oh, you were hanging off this building, guy stamps on your foot, you fall, and you hit the ground, take 2 harm, and you say, no, I'm going to resist that, and on the way down, I bounce off an awning, which helps to break my fall, right? So clearly you had described hitting the ground, and I have wound it back to say, no, actually on the way, this happened. I feel like that's as much of a retcon. And the thing, so which is fine. You know, I don't actually have a problem with that personally. I have a slight preference for maybe it's best not to describe it until you've done all of the modifiers, and that's how I advocate doing it in X10. But I think there's just a different mouthfeel, and it's like, whether do you like this mouthfeel or not, and is it does it fit with the game? I feel like the Carl from Brindlewood games want you to take this writer's room culture where everything is quite meta, and you are able to just sort of step completely out of the situation and say, well, what if this happened instead, right? So it's kind of, I think it fits with the game. It's not, it isn't my preference, and I find it particularly problematic in certain cases. I think we had a case in the pod where Becky narrated a character do it, but like poisoning us or something, and then we were like,
Yeah, I
okay,
did.
well, we're going to mask up, and that doesn't happen anymore, so we don't get poisoned. And it's like, well, is that person a villain or aren't they? I'm not sure what's happening now. Have we just retconned them out of being a bad guy, or what went on? So and again, like, if you do take this writer's room approach, then maybe that's fine. It's like, you know, the writer's room said, yeah, we didn't like that. We've just struck it from the script.
I feel like
But
that's
if you aren't in a writer's room mentality, if you do feel like I want to operate in a world where there's a concrete fiction, that feels too much to me. I think saying, oh, no, I felt I hit an awning is kind of like, it's more like, you know, the writer didn't quite describe all the detail, and I've added some. I've recontextualized, as Becky puts it. Whereas saying, no, you weren't poisoned at all, something else happened, that's not recontextualizing, that's rewriting.
Interesting too here that we're talking about kind of fictional grit, and for me, actually, that's the thing that I found most difficult about masks, is that, at least for the masks of the past, where you are having a flashback and narrating a thing, either that means you've introduced bookkeeping that you have to come back to later, or you just throw a whole bunch of that grit into the current scene by interrupting the flow in order to have a flashback to an unrelated event, then come back forwards. I know best practice is to leave those till later.
But I remember leaving them till later in our pod game, and they started to really rack up.
Pile up, yeah.
They're really piling up, and then which I'm not sure I liked. I mean, I like both of you. Having GM'd a very, very long game campaign of the Between, I wasn't a fan of masks. I could see what they were trying to do in the system. The writer's room approach isn't one that I particularly enjoy. I think it's a completely valid form of play, and if you like it, that's awesome. But I find the idea that it feels unsatisfying to me, because I feel like what I enjoy about a game is that you give me a fictional situation and I'm going to come up with something clever to do with that fictional situation, and then we'll resolve it, and either I will be lucky on the dice, which, let's face it, I usually am, or you're Josh and you're very unlucky on the dice and it doesn't pan out. But either way, it feels to me that if you can then say, well, this thing happened, and the GM, because this is what you're required to do as a GM in the Between, is describe in quite a lot of detail the thing that happens as a result of the dice roll, and then you can say, and now you're going to spend a mask and say it didn't happen. It feels like it just destabilizes the whole of the fiction. It's like, well, nothing matters. All of that careful, clever idea that you had, it didn't matter because we could just change the fiction like that. All of the careful setting up that I did as the GM to put really cool, interesting things in for you to write off, none of that mattered because you could just change it. And I don't enjoy that. I like, and it actually speaks to what I like in a lot of board games and things, and why I love bridge so much, although I haven't played in years, is that I like being given a hand and having to do the best that I can do with the hand that I've been given. I don't want to get to the end of the hand, having worked really hard to do my bridge hand, and then somebody just say, "Oh, well, I'll just give you this ace of spades on top of that, Becky." And I'm like, "But I had a whole..." But it kind of feels like it invalidates the experience and the fiction that I had put all of that time and energy into.
What I like about it is the certainty, and this goes back to my
Yes.
personalities, that I like certainty. And one piece of certainty that it gives you is you can go into a situation and you know that you definitely will be able to avoid a miss. And as long as you don't roll a miss, you'll definitely be able to get a strong hit. And that's really nice. There's no risk of, oh, I won't quite have enough of my currency to spend. So I think for me, it's just the kind of slight weirdness of that alt reality feel. It's not something I like a lot. And I also think you can do it without that. I know Jason is very keen to say, well, it's fun. And I guess, for people who find it fun, it is fun, of course. But a thing that I do in X10, and I think you could do this in Carl from Brindlewood just as easily, is sort of say, well, spend the mask if you want to before we narrate the result. If you're not sure what the result is going to be and whether it's worth spending the mask, you can sort of say, hey, if I don't spend this mask, am I going to die? And then the GM's like, yeah, you are going to die. I'll tell you how in a moment if you like. And then they go, nah, I think I'll spend the mask.
This actually points to one of the things that occasionally frustrates me a little bit about after the fact assists. Is that strange position you get in where the assist that you offer is a number. So you get +1 to your roll or whatever, but your roll is not close enough to a bracket, like in a Powered by the Apocalypse game or something, for you to be able to get over the line. And so nobody assists then, which means you haven't wasted any currency on something that's not useful and all the rest of it. But it does mean that there are certain dice rolls that for no fictional reason nobody can help you with.
Yes.
Yeah, I find that sometimes a little bit weird. Like somebody's in a tricky situation, I want to help. The dice have hit the table, and we're playing a game where I now mechanically can't help.
I mean, for what it's worth, in my head, in those situations, you were helping. It's just we didn't bother to pay attention to it because there's no need.
Right. Which might be a solution to the problem, right? Is to, if I'm a player who is looking for that, and that brings me to maybe the last thing I want to say. If I'm a player who's looking for opportunities to assist, like I'm engaged with the fiction even when I'm not spotlighted, then I can still jump in that moment and say, I try to help and here's how, but it just doesn't make a difference. So, it doesn't make a mechanical difference.
But it might make a difference to your relationships.
100%, yeah.
Which is interesting and matters. But we sideline it because we don't need to know for mechanical reasons, so we don't know. I think that's a shame. There's a missed opportunity for interesting character interaction.
Yeah. There is also something appealing about. I mean, I'm a guy who loves mixed successes and poor dice rolls, even as a player. But there's something kind of nice about assisting a futile assist.
I like that. Yeah.
I tried to help, but yeah.
We have 5 minutes left on our chat, or maybe it's a few more minutes, but it's around about 5. So I feel like we might just start winding up a little bit.
Well, so I've got one last thing I want to say, which might be a good wind-up point. Maybe you can tell me. I think this is not only a discussion about design, so about thinking about what these things feel like when you're designing a game, and whether the timing of your assists or whatever suits the feel of the game that you're trying to build. But I also think it's a play question. It's about how you can get the most out of the games that you're playing, because if you spend a little bit of time to think about the places in which you're modifying dice rolls and the reasons in which you're doing it and why it's done that way, then you can improve your play by leaning into the things that it's asking you to do, or not fighting against the things that it's asking you to do. So I think Josh had an example before there where you were talking about on those resistance rolls, maybe you don't narrate the full mechanical consequence until somebody's had an opportunity to deploy their resists or whatever. And I think that's a good thing to do when you're running something like Blades, a Forge in the Dark game. There's nothing in the rulebook that told you to do that.
Yeah.
But you've thought a little bit about how this feels when it's at the table. And so you've just sort of slightly adjusted the way you play in order to get the most out of the mechanic as it's described. So you can think about this as a player as well as a designer, I think.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep, agree.
Final thoughts, Josh? I know that we've kind of talked about 3 buckets of types of modifiers, and that when I originally said to you and Nick, oh, there's only 3, you both scoffed and said, oh, I think there's a few more than that, Becky. Do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Well, I've got a whole load of axes on which these things vary, which it would take too long to list them all. Well, it wouldn't.
Big blog post coming then, should we
We've
say?
kind of covered them off in the discussion. I thought it's quite interesting. Like, this is maybe a slight tangent and so weird to do it right at the end, but I'm doing it anyway. And that is, there are some games where your dice roll is not necessarily the case that higher equals better. I think Apocalypse Keys is the example that always leaps to my mind, where if you get a middling result, that's the best. If you get a low result, that's a failure. But if you get a high result, you've kind of gone too far. And that makes all these things quite interesting, because now it's like, will I put in more to this roll at the risk that I make it kind of worse? And I think Apocalypse Keys mostly does all of those decisions before the roll, which is kind of a shame in a way, because you could get yourself into a position where you're like, oh, I've missed. Shall I have a reroll and risk hitting the higher number? But anyway, I think it's quite interesting when these sorts of mechanics give you a possible negative, as opposed to the kind of, you've spent some stress, you're pushing yourself further towards a definite bad thing, like we see in Blades and Last Fleet and others, where there's you make the assist and there's a possibility of something bad happening, like you get that in Apocalypse World. If you make an assist, you have to roll the dice, and one possible outcome is you make things worse, and another possible outcome is you make things better, but you put yourself in the firing line in some way. So that's all fun. I think that makes modifying the dice more interesting.
Yes, I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there should be a big blog post coming out from this at some point. But before we go, we can do a very quick round of critical hits or critical fails. Has anybody got a critical hit? And if you are still with us, then feel free to put your critical hits and critical fails in the comments. Josh, critical hit, critical fail this week?
Completely failed to think about this in advance.
That is a critical fail.
That's a critical fail. But I'll just say that we went to the zoo on Sunday and we managed to see the snow leopard for the first time,
Nice.
which is a hard thing to do. Like, the snow leopard is a very shy animal, and I think also very well camouflaged. So you'll go there and you're like, can I not see it, or is it just that I cannot see it? And in this case, it was like that. It was lying on a rock, and it was so well camouflaged you wouldn't know it was there, except you could see its little paw print pattern on its foot that was turned towards you, and that was how you knew it was there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty great.
That's cool.
That's pretty great. Nick, have you got a critical hit or a critical fail for me?
Yeah, what I'm learning here is that critical hits are always better than critical fails.
It's true. It's true.
Yes, I have a critical hit, and that's working with talented freelancers. It's one of my favorite things about making games, is the bit where I get to commission cool artists or designers or writers to do their thing. And just before this call, I got from a guy called Mark Riemann an brand spanking new title and logo for Speed Demons, based on a concept by Jin Hermiston, and it's fantastic, and I love it, and I'm very excited about it.
I wish that you'd said that was coming up, because then I said screen share. But you're probably not set up for that.
I'm not. No, all kinds of notes and weirdness on my screen. But yeah, really great to receive. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, talented artists and designers everywhere, for being ace.
That's really
Now you're
cool.
making me feel bad for not mentioning Jog's map, Jog Brosnan's map that he's
I'll
done
do that
for
because I haven't
Exton.
done mine yet. My critical
Cool.
hit this week is
Nice.
Jog Brosnan's map for Extenebris. So Jog has been doing the kind of stellar map of the space systems, of the different systems in Extenebris, and it looks really, I mean, I love Jog's style anyway, but it does look super cool. Maybe, Josh, we should take a little bit of if Jog's okay with it, taking part of his work in progress and either putting it on the Discord or the Patreon for people to get a sneaky peek early view.
I will think about it.
All
By the
right,
way,
that's
have you noticed
amazing.
some people are doing critical hits in the comments, so
Oh,
you
I
can
have.
let them-
Oh, amazing.
Oh, I'm going to put those up then. So we've got John, Asher's Ridge. Very pretty game. I've literally just finished reading it myself, and I'm hoping that we're going to have a chance to play it when Nick comes and visits us later in the year. But yes. Oh, and Merlot's doing very well with his progress and training. That's very good. That's very good.
We'll leave it as an exercise to the reader to guess what kind of object Merlot is.
And Seeds, energy to do some work on. Yeah, finding the time and energy to get some design work done is serious critical hit.
Yeah.
Is it really pirates? Oh yeah, pirates.
Yeah,
I was
pirates.
thinking maybe Seeds means Sirats or something. No, pirates. I get the joke.
Right. Time to go and have some proper lunch, everybody. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Lovely to see you, folks.
Bye.
See you later. Awkward waving.